mother always told me never to curse my work no matter how hard it was. She would scold me whenever I complained or spoke badly, always reminding me that words have power. I listened to her more to avoid arguing than because I truly believed it. But one night I had to learn the hard way why she said that. For years I sold churros in the main plaza of my town in Veracruz. I did that job because I had no other choice. I needed to earn money to eat and to help at home. My father had already passed away, and my mother was sick. Money was never enough, and I always carried a lot of stress and responsibility on my shoulders. On top of that, selling churros was physically exhausting, not just financially hard. You work with heat, with oil, pushing the cart, carrying the tank, the ingredients, standing for hours. It was 2012 and I was 19 years old. I wanted to go to college, but I couldn't. And I carried all that frustration with me every single day. Some days I sold well. Other days I barely sold anything and went home with used oil and an almost empty cash box. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that a better job would come eventually. But months went by, and everything stayed the same. And like I said, I wasn't someone who cursed or spoke badly. In my house, my mother always said you shouldn't speak ill of life or complain about it, and I tried my best to listen to her. But one night I finally broke. If I remember correctly, I was pushing my churro cart down a quiet street on my way home, telling myself that tomorrow would be a better day. That tomorrow I'd sell enough to buy the medicine my mother had run out of. My head was full of bills and debts, and my thoughts drifted to very dark places. Suddenly the feeling hit me that no matter how hard I worked, I would never get anywhere. That I was stuck. And on top of that, a dog tried to bite me. It came rushing out of a gate, barking and lunging at me. I managed to move behind the cart and pretended to grab a rock. The dog ran off, but it left me shaken and angry. It was a small thing, but it was the spark that made everything boil over. The dog didn't bite me, but my heart was racing and my head was burning with rage. I kept walking and started complaining to myself. At first it was quiet, saying I was tired, that I was fed up, that it wasn't fair. Then I started complaining louder, as if I were finally releasing all the anger and frustration I'd been carrying since I started selling churros in the plaza. I began cursing my situation, my life. I said things I don't want to repeat. And then, in a moment of pure frustration, with my throat tight and my mind clouded by anger, I said something my mother had always begged me never to say. I said that I wished I were dead right then and there. I didn't shout it. I just let it out like a release. I didn't actually want to die. What I wanted was for the weight of carrying everything at once to disappear. But the moment I finished saying it, I heard a voice behind me. A woman's voice very close asked me gently, "Are you sure?" The instant I heard that, I felt my blood turn cold. And I mean that literally. I remember feeling my entire body freeze in a way I've never felt again. I stood there gripping the churro cart and slowly turned around. About 2 or 3 meters away, standing in the middle of the street, was a woman dressed in black. Her face was covered with a veil or dark cloth. You could barely make out her eyes through the fabric, helped only by the light from a nearby street lamp. Her hands were crossed in front of her, and she wasn't moving. She didn't look nervous. She was standing there as if she had been there all along, waiting. The woman asked again if I was sure, and although I tried, I couldn't answer right away. My tongue tangled up, and the knot in my throat made it hard to speak. I stammered before I could form a proper sentence. I told her I didn't mean it, that it was just an expression, that I was frustrated. But I wasn't serious. To try to ease the tension, I let out a nervous, awkward laugh. She didn't laugh with me. She didn't change her posture. She stayed exactly the same, as if she hadn't even heard me. I swallowed and waited for her to say something else. Then, in a low voice, she said something I still remember word for word, that I should be careful what I wished for. She said it softly, like advice, but in that moment I took it as a threat. Without saying anything else, she turned around and walked away down the same street, moving very slowly. I stood there, frozen, watching her until she disappeared into the darkness of that poorly lit road. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe a few seconds, maybe longer, until I finally shook off the fear. I tried to follow her with my eyes, but there was very little light, and the dark fabric of her clothes blended into the night. I crossed myself because I didn't know what that had been. And just as I was about to start pushing the churro cart again, I heard the screech of tires and a loud crash. A metallic impact, like two large objects colliding, came from the corner at the end of the street where it turned onto a main avenue. I froze again, but this time for a different reason. I ran a few steps, pushing the cart as best I could, and looked toward the corner. A car had crashed head-on into a pole. There was smoke. Another car had also lost control, but managed to stop in time. I stood there out of breath, my hands shaking, staring at the accident, with a horrible feeling in my chest as I remembered what she had told me. To be careful what I wished for. In a tragicomic twist, the people who gathered to see the accident ended up buying the churros I had left. I stepped away in embarrassment when the police and the ambulance arrived. That night, the two people in that car died, and I couldn't stop replaying that woman's words over and over in my mind. When I got home, I kept thinking about everything that had happened. How I hadn't heard her approach until she spoke. How I didn't see her again after she walked away. And the tone in her voice. I came to one conclusion. That woman wasn't a normal person. She was death, passing by to take two people whose fate was already sealed. And she heard me complaining about my life, about my hardships, and came to ask if I truly meant what I said. It sounds unbelievable, but that's what happened. And believe me, I was never again heard saying anything so negative out loud. Thank God things eventually got better. I started doing well selling churros. We got through those hard times, and later I found a better job. Now, whenever I feel overwhelmed, whenever frustration rises up, I bite my tongue before saying certain things, just in case someone is listening and thinks I'm serious. I'm grateful to be alive, for the work I have and for the family I have, and I couldn't wish for anything better. Hit the like button if you are enjoying it. Let's continue. I work nights selling hot dogs on a street in my neighborhood, near a municipal hospital. I start cooking around 6 in the evening and usually work until early morning, because that's when sales are best. Security guards, taxi drivers, nurses, and paramedics are my most regular customers, though there's usually always someone passing by who buys something, even if it's just a neighbor who can't sleep that night. I've been doing this for years, and I don't like things being out of place. At night, if you're not careful, you can get robbed or scammed. So I always pay close attention to everything I do, what I serve, and the money I take in. For years, nothing truly strange ever happened to me. Sure, I saw ugly things, drunk fights, people getting aggressive out of nowhere, and once some cops showed up asking too many questions and tried to extort me because I didn't have a permit to be there. But things without an explanation? No. Not until one early morning. It was a Tuesday if I remember correctly. I know because that day is always slower than the rest. It was already 2:30 in the morning and the street was quieter than usual. A bar nearby was still open at that hour, but even they seemed to be having a slow night, with no people coming out. The hospital looked calm, its lights still on, and on the same street, about 30 meters away, There was a taxi parked. I was thinking about closing up, but I convinced myself to wait another half hour. If I didn't sell anything in that time, I'd go home. After 3 in the morning, I always pack up anyway, unless the night is really good. While I was calmly cleaning the grill, I saw someone approaching from the hospital side. I told myself it had been a good idea to stay a little longer and looked up. That's when my instinct told me something was off. It was a person walking very slowly, but they didn't look drunk and they weren't staggering. They were just moving slowly, and that alone put me on alert. Most people who come by at that hour walk fast. This one didn't. When he got closer, I could tell he was a man in his 40s or 50s, but the streetlight didn't let me see him clearly. He stopped in front of the cart and stared at me without saying anything. I greeted him in my normal tone and asked what he wanted. He pointed at the menu I had hanging and showed me 2 fingers. I asked if he wanted everything on them, and he nodded without any expression. I started cooking. Everything was ready, but something about him made me uncomfortable, especially the intense way his eyes moved over the sauce containers, the grill, and my hands. He finally spoke, in a strange voice, like his throat was dry. He whispered that his son also sold food. That made him seem a bit more normal, so I asked him where. He didn't answer. He just went back to staring at the sauce containers, as if I hadn't asked anything. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't interested in talking to him anyway. I finished his order and asked if he wanted it to go. Again, he didn't respond. I started to get impatient and asked him 3 times before he finally said he wanted it to go. When I handed him the bag, he didn't take it right away. He stared at it as if he didn't understand what it was. That's when I got worried, thinking maybe he was a patient who had wandered out of the hospital, drugged or disoriented. In the end, he took the bag with one hand and pulled out money with the other. He paid with a wrinkled bill and walked away. I checked the bill just in case. When I told him I needed to give him change, he turned around to look at me one last time, but didn't acknowledge me, and walked back toward the hospital, moving slowly, the bag hanging from his hand. I watched him go, wondering what was wrong with him, before putting the money in the cash box. I started closing up, turned off the grill, put the sauces away. Everything was normal. I had already forgotten about the man when I heard a light knock against the metal of the cart. A short, dry knock, like someone tapping it with a knuckle. I thought it was a customer and stood up, but there was no one around. I told myself it was just the metal adjusting to the cold after hours of heat from the grill. But when I bent down again, I heard the knock a second time. That's when I walked around my stand to make sure no one was messing with me. No one was there. I went back to the table and noticed something else. The paper napkins I always keep next to the prep area, so I can hand them directly to customers, weren't there. They were on the other side of the stand. That was impossible. I always leave them in the same place. I told myself someone must be messing with me, or that a customer had moved them earlier without me noticing. Still, those small details were making me nervous, so I hurried to finish and leave. And just as I bent down to put the cash away, I realized the wrinkled bill from my last customer was gone. I calmly grabbed my phone and shined the light downward toward the gas tank and the bags. My hand was shaking because I could feel that something wasn't right. I searched everywhere. I know what I carry and what I make in a night, and that bill had to be there. But it wasn't. And then I heard another knock. I stood up suddenly to see who it was. I was already on edge, and the air left my lungs when I saw the same man in the cap standing in front of the cart. I didn't know what to say. I stared at him for a few seconds, wondering if what I was seeing was real, or if I had lost my mind. Finally, he spoke in the same dry voice and asked if I could give him two with everything. I stammered and said I couldn't. Or at least, I think I did. I don't remember clearly. The man nodded and walked slowly back toward the hospital with that same slow pace. All I could think about was how he had approached without making a sound. I don't think I've ever finished packing up that fast. I left as soon as I could. The next day, a very kind doctor who sometimes came to eat greeted me and ordered the usual. While I was preparing her food, around 1 in the morning, I casually asked if she had seen a man like the one from the night before leaving through the emergency area. She said no, but added that a lot of people pass through there every day. I knew that didn't really prove anything either, but deep down I was left with the feeling that the man I saw that night wasn't a real person. And as for the missing bill, I never found it. Let's continue. Back in 2015, before I got my current job, I used to sell candy and snacks from a small cart at night. It was a simple cart a neighbor had lent me, so I could get by while I looked for something more stable. I always went where there were people. At night I'd set up in the town square, outside the hospital near the emergency area, or in the bar district. I rotated between spots. When it got really late, I'd just push the cart back home and do it all again the next day. I did that for about a year. That night I stayed out later than usual. I'd sold well because there had been a music event downtown, and I also got caught up talking with a friend I hadn't seen in a long time. By the time I realized it, it was already 1 in the morning. I called my mother to let her know I was on my way home and started pushing the cart back. Normally, I took the same route every night, the best lit streets in the neighborhood. But that day, trying to save time, I cut through a street I almost never used. It was a bad decision, even though I didn't know it at the time. The street was empty and dark. On both sides, there were a few houses with their lights off. One street lamp lit up part of the road, but at the end of the street, everything was pitch black. I walked along, listening to the squeak of the cart's wheels. At first, everything was normal. But just a few meters before reaching the streetlight, I felt the cart, which had been rolling easily, suddenly become very heavy, as if the wheels had gotten stuck. My first thought was that a rock had gotten lodged in one of the wheels, or that fatigue had finally caught up with me. But when I checked, the wheels were fine. I pushed again and realized it was still heavy. The more I pushed forward, the more resistance there was. I didn't understand what was happening. I think I spent about 5 minutes there, checking the wheels and the ground until I got fed up. I noticed something strange. The wheels rolled just fine when I pulled the cart backward, but the moment I tried to push it forward, it became heavier again. That made no sense. I just wanted to get home, so I pushed once more. And that's when I understood what was happening, even though I couldn't believe it. It felt as if someone I couldn't see was pushing from the other side, trying to stop me from going forward. My fingers went numb, and a chill ran down my spine. There was no explanation for it. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. On the other side of the cart, pushing back with all its strength, determined not to let me pass. Under different circumstances, I think I would have understood the message and turned around. But instead, I went into denial and kept pushing forward, ignoring what was clearly a warning. The farther I tried to go, the stronger the resistance became. I was already very nervous. One thing is a faulty wheel. Another is feeling something invisible actively holding you back. I told myself it was exhaustion, that the pavement was uneven. But my stubbornness had a limit, and I reached it when, a few meters ahead, a shadow appeared in front of me. It was just an instant, the time it took to blink, but it was clear enough that it's never left my memory. It was a dark shape, like the silhouette of a person standing right in front of me. Exactly where someone would be if they were actually pushing the cart in the opposite direction. I saw it clearly because I had already passed the street light, and the light was coming from behind me. That thing even cast a shadow on the ground. I ran to the cart, grabbed it however I could, and started pulling it backward without looking behind me. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit street with some traffic. People walking home from the music event in the same direction as me. Once I was there on that brighter street, the cart rolled normally again. There was no resistance at all, and I had no trouble pushing it the rest of the way home. That night I arrived with my heart racing, replaying everything that had happened. I even told my mother, who was still awake. She got scared too, but neither of us could come up with any explanation. The next day, I found out something that left me cold. Through neighbors' rumors, I learned that later that same night, farther down that very street past the corner I would have reached, some guys coming back from the event were robbed. They took their money, their phones, even their shoes. It happened exactly where the street gets darker and no one passes by. I stayed quiet when they told me. I didn't say anything to anyone except my mother. That's when it really hit me. If I had kept going to that corner, I could have been the one who got robbed. They could have taken all the money I'd made that day. And my merchandise. I don't know what that shadow was. A warning maybe. Or just a coincidence. But I assume I should be grateful because it kept me from going through something much worse that night. Since then I avoid dark or empty streets. Saving time is pointless if it means putting yourself in danger. Let's continue. I sell food at night on a busy avenue in Oaxaca. I won't say the exact street because I still work there. But it's a well-known corner with a lot of taxi traffic. People getting off work late. Young people walking by. And a bus stop nearby. I arrive with my cart, set everything up, light the charcoal and get to work. I like that corner because business is good and people already know me. Customers come on their own because the smell draws them in. And there are taxi drivers who've been buying from me for years. Now, I'm a 40-year-old woman with strong instincts. I don't see shadows or get nervous over nothing. And working on the street for so many years has taught me how to read the atmosphere. One thing is a normal night, with its usual sounds and silences. Another is when something feels wrong. And I don't want to sound dramatic. But the night this story happened was very strange. The weather was perfect. Cool, no strong wind, no rain. I got to my usual corner, and the first few hours were normal. I sold to a lot of people during the afternoon, and later on to some taxi drivers I already knew. One of them mentioned that the night felt a little slow and that they were heading home. Even so, I didn't feel like anything was wrong at first. But about an hour later, around 9:30, the avenue started to empty out. I looked in both directions and saw long stretches with no cars. One would pass every now and then, but not often. There was no music coming from anywhere. That's when I felt a strange tension rise in me, and I knew that maybe that night wasn't a good one to stay out late. I started packing up. I'm not sure of the exact time because I don't keep my phone in my hand, but I estimate it was around 10 when I was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of danger so strong that I froze in front of my cart. It felt like something inside me tightened my chest and said, "Don't move. Something is coming." The feeling hit so suddenly that I didn't even have time to analyze it. At the same time, I noticed the streetlights starting to flicker. Several lights at once on all the nearby poles, like someone was playing with a switch. I don't know much about electricity, but I know that wasn't normal. And the worst part wasn't the lights, or even the feeling of imminent danger. It was what came seconds later. My body told me to close my eyes. It wasn't a decision I made out of fear. It was instinctive and automatic, like pulling your hand away from fire. I shut my eyes tightly, as if obeying an order, and grabbed onto my cart. Something inside me activated and told me not to look. I didn't understand what was happening or why I felt that way, but I obeyed. My eyes were closed, my jaw clenched, I don't think there was a single part of my body that wasn't tense as I stood still behind my cart. Not crouching, not running. I stayed exactly where I was, my heart racing. And a second later I felt it. It was like a stampede of people rushing past at full speed. I didn't see them, but I felt them. I felt the air move around me, a vibration near my ears. I knew something was passing both in front of me and behind me at the same time, like a crowd surrounding me and moving past. But there weren't clear footsteps. It wasn't the sound of shoes hitting the pavement. It was more like pressure, a brushing sensation, as if feet were being dragged across the asphalt. And mixed with that sound were whispers, many voices at once, layered over each other. They weren't soft voices. They were curses. I won't repeat what I heard, even though I remember it clearly because it turns my stomach. They were insults, threats, ugly things spoken with anger. I heard everything clearly, and at the same time I couldn't understand what was happening. I don't know how I managed to keep my composure, but even so I didn't move an inch. I didn't dare open my eyes, not even a little. I stayed still, listening to what was happening around me, and through my eyelids I could tell that the streetlights were still flickering. Along with the whispers and the dragging sounds, there was another noise, an unpleasant one, like when an old television loses signal, that static white noise, but louder right inside my head. It felt like the air itself was charged with that sound, and mixed with it, the whispers became even worse. It didn't last long. I estimate no more than 10 seconds, maybe 20. But it was enough for my body to react as if I were facing something that could kill me. When that wave of people finally passed, my body started to return to normal. My legs and hands were shaking uncontrollably, and I felt like I might faint. I wanted to cry, but I held it in. Even though part of me knew something had happened, I still didn't dare open my eyes. I only did when I heard a car pass along the avenue. Suddenly the air felt clean again, like something heavy had lifted. My hands, which had been rigid, relaxed. My breathing, which had been locked, finally loosened. That's when I opened my eyes. I hurried to finish packing up and go home, clenching my teeth so hard that my jaw hurt for the rest of the night. The street was just as empty as before, but the lights were no longer flickering. The cart was exactly where it had been, and there was no one around me. Not a single person crossing the avenue. Not a shadow in the distance. Nothing that could explain what had just happened. I'm not a skeptic. I believe in supernatural events just as much as I believe in God. But in that moment, I wanted to find a logical explanation, because what had just happened was so strange, so far outside anything normal that I couldn't accept it. Still, there was nothing on that avenue that could explain it. I thought maybe a bus full of people had passed slowly, and that's what I heard. But that didn't make sense. I thought maybe something had happened to me, a sudden drop or spike in blood pressure, and I touched my face, my chest, and took a deep breath. But nothing felt off. I felt like I always do. I decided not to dwell on it and finished packing up so I could go home. I don't think I've ever done it so fast. I kept looking to both sides, expecting it to happen again. Thank God it didn't, and I made it home safely. I pushed the cart to where I always store it and went inside. That night I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the whispers. The next day I went back to work, scared. But it was a good night, and that event never happened again. Years have passed, and nothing even remotely similar has repeated itself. I asked the taxi drivers and people in the area, but none of them experienced anything like what I did that night. I've worked quiet nights and busy nights. I've seen ugly things done by living people, But that feeling, that stampede, that static, those whispers, thankfully never came back. And even so, that night marked me, because it has no explanation. Let's continue. My name is Francisco, and I sell fruit trays in Houston. People like them because I prepare everything fresh, right on the spot. In the summer they sell themselves. It's fresh, filling, and healthy. I have a fixed spot in front of a fairly busy road. For now, my stand isn't very big. Just a table with a cooler full of ice and my tools for cutting fruit and assembling the trays. I'm very organized. I like to keep the fruit neatly lined up. The trays within reach, the knife in its place. Everything arranged carefully so nothing moves or falls. That detail is important for this story. The day everything happened was going really well. It was July, extremely hot, and people were craving something fresh. I sold a lot, one tray after another, all morning and all afternoon. Sometimes I barely had time to breathe between orders, and I liked that because it meant I was making good money that day. Later in the afternoon, I think around 6 when the sun started to go down, a car pulled over. A woman got out and came up to the stand to order 2 trays. I started preparing the order like always, and while I was cutting fruit with a knife, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A small blonde girl about 6 or 7 years old standing roughly 50 meters away, next to a streetlight at the corner. I didn't see any adult nearby, which struck me as strange because kids aren't usually left alone around here. Her clothes also caught my attention. They looked old, messy, like a street kid's clothes. That felt out of place in that area. Sure, there are homeless people around, but you don't usually see young kids alone like that. Normally someone picks them up, or they're taken to a shelter. Or at least they aren't left so visibly out in the open. I looked at her for another second, trying to figure out if she was lost. She seemed focused on me. Her posture was strange, like she was getting ready to run. I didn't say anything. I kept attending to the woman. I handed her the trays, charged her, she thanked me, got back into her car, and left without any issue. For the first time since I'd opened at 9 in the morning, the street became relatively quiet. There were fewer cars passing and no people walking by. I looked back toward the streetlight, and the girl was gone. I assumed someone had come for her or that she'd simply run off. But a few seconds later, I saw her running toward me from the other side of the street. It scared me because she didn't look both ways before crossing. Luckily, no cars were passing at that moment. She didn't seem to realize the risk. She ran toward me as if she were playing. She stopped right next to my table, invading my space as if she knew me, and stared straight at me. I thought she was going to ask for fruit or money. Honestly, I felt a mix of pity and tenderness. The first thing that came out of my mouth was asking her if she was hungry. And almost immediately, without waiting for her answer, I started preparing a small tray with a bit of everything. I already had a piece of mango in my hand and was about to grab the knife and start cutting when the girl did something that confused me. She stuck her tongue out at me, casually, mockingly, the way small children do. And before I could say anything or play along, she ran off again, just as fast as she'd arrived. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't even say hello. If she was in need, it didn't show. Because I was about to give her a tray for free, and instead of waiting, she ran away. I stood there, not understanding what had just happened. It left me with a strange feeling, but I brushed it off and told myself it was nothing. Probably just a rude kid. I put the mango away, straightened the table, and kept working. At that point, I was still expecting to sell a bit more before closing. A few minutes later, that's when the truly strange part began. I was standing in front of the table, deciding whether to cut more fruit in advance, when I noticed something move out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't shaking, and it wasn't the wind. It was a small but clear movement. A piece of fruit shifted a few millimeters to the left, as if I had pushed it myself with my fingers. I saw it and stared, waiting for it to be my imagination. Then I saw it again. A large, heavy watermelon moved slightly, like someone gently nudged it from the side. My throat went dry. I thought maybe I was trembling or something like that. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed, but the street was empty. I grabbed the table and realized neither I nor the table were shaking. I looked back at the cooler where I kept the fruit, and something else moved. One of my tools, a spoon I sometimes use to arrange fruit or add seasoning, rotated slightly as if someone had touched it with a finger. That's when my stomach tightened, because I understood that the things at my stand were moving on their own. My first thought was a draft of air, but there was no wind, and the movement was deliberate and gentle. It wasn't everything moving at once. It was one item at a time, one after another, as if someone were testing my reaction. I tensed up and started breathing unevenly because, to be honest, I'm a pretty nervous person when it comes to these things. The sun was going down, and the shadows were stretching out. The afternoon light was turning orange, and that mix of light and the empty street made me feel very alone. I tried to stay calm, telling myself the table might be uneven, and I convinced myself to keep working. I reached for the knife, extended my hand to grab it, and the knife flipped. It rotated on itself as if someone had grabbed it by the handle and turned it sharply. I jumped back. A moving knife was more than I could accept. My fear must have been obvious because at that exact moment I heard laughter. It was a child's laugh, and immediately I thought of the blonde girl. I didn't see her. There was no one near my stand. But the laughter reached me clearly, as if she were right beside me, where she had been standing earlier. I froze, standing straight, trying to decide what to do. In that moment, I felt a strong urge to pack everything up and leave. And that's exactly what I did. To me, it was clear that something supernatural was messing with me, and the only out-of-place thing that had happened that afternoon was that girl. I didn't wait for anything else to happen. I packed up the fruit, covered everything, and left without looking around, afraid I might see something I didn't want to see. I pushed my stand to the storage spot where I always keep it, about 1.5 blocks away, then got into my car and drove straight home. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened to me again, and I hope it stays that way. I don't know what caused what I saw, but my mother-in-law told me it might have been the spirit of a mischievous, unbaptized girl passing through the area, who decided to make me her entertainment that night. I don't know anything about ghosts or spirits, but if that's the case, I hope she rests in peace, and that she doesn't come back to my fruit stand. Thanks for listening. One more story won't hurt. Click it.